Night had fallen thick over the bustling city, wrapping the streets in damp silence. On a narrow roadway, lit only by scattered headlights and the distant glow of shops, a young woman knelt desperately beside an unconscious stranger sprawled on the asphalt, his shirt stained and chest rising weakly with each breath. Behind them, a battered sedan stood with its hood crumpled, witnesses frozen with shock and uncertainty, some raising their phones but choosing distance over action. Joanna's simple dress clung to her, soaked and dirty, her hands trembling as she pressed against the man's wounds, calling out for help that never came soon enough. Only hours before, Joanna was laboring through another endless shift, her mind crowded with worry for the two siblings waiting in a dark, rented room blocks away. Poverty had carved deep lines in her life, every day a battle against hunger and disease. It was desperation, not courage, that once led her to a choice she could barely speak of. One night she would mourn forever. Yet, as rain splattered across her face, Joanna forced open the car door with urgent strength, dragging the man to safety while a crowd looked on but did not move. She did not know that the life she saved would belong to Maxwell Roberts, a billionaire shielded by privilege, power, and a mother whose pride demanded perfection at any cost. In the flood-lit chaos, Joanna's act of rescue would draw her from obscurity into a world of fierce judgment and impossible stakes. Her bravery soon weighed against her darkest secret, and love challenged by a relentless campaign of shame. The call came at 3 a.m, shattering the thin peace of Joanna's childhood bedroom. She was 15, tangled in blankets decorated with faded cartoon characters, her homework still spread across the floor. The officer's voice on the phone was careful, practiced, but the words landed like blows. Crash, highway, both parents, no survivors. Joanna stood in the hallway, receiver trembling in her hand, staring at the closed doors where Michael and Sarah slept, 10 and 8 years old. Still believing the world was safe, she set the phone down gently, as if silence could keep the truth contained just a little longer, and sank to the floor, pressing her fist against her mouth to muffle the sound of her breaking. The funeral was brief and poorly attended. Her parents had been quiet people, hard-working but isolated, their extended family scattered or estranged. Joanna stood between Michael and Sarah in borrowed black clothes, watching the caskets lower into cold ground, while social workers exchanged quiet, pointed looks nearby. She heard the whispered words: foster care, separation, different homes. Her hand tightened around Sarah's small fingers. That night, in the cramped apartment that still smelled like her mother's cooking, Joanna made a promise. She gathered her siblings on the worn couch, their faces pale and lost, and spoke with a certainty she did not feel. "We stay together, no matter what. I'll take care of us." The system fought her. She was a minor, they said, with no income, no legal standing, no support. But Joanna was relentless. She found a distant aunt willing to serve as a paper guardian, dropped out of high school the next week, and took 2 jobs: morning shifts at a laundromat, evening shifts cleaning office buildings. She learned to forge the aunt's signature on school forms, to stretch a single chicken across 3 meals, to smile through exhaustion so Michael and Sarah wouldn't see her fear. Months blurred into years. Joanna became expert at survival, shopping day-old bread, patching shoes with glue, keeping the lights off during the day to save electricity. She learned which neighbors would pretend not to notice when rent was late, which food pantries asked the fewest questions. But before we dive deeper into this story, please kindly take a moment to comment below with the city you are watching this video from. Hit the like button And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel to help me to reach my first 1,000 subscribers if you haven't done that already. Michael and Sarah grew taller, their laughter rare but precious. Their homework spread on the table while Joanna nodded off, standing at the stove. She watched other teenagers through shop windows, giggling over clothes and boys and plans for college, lives that felt impossibly distant. Sometimes, late at night when her siblings were asleep, Joanna allowed herself to cry, quietly, fists pressed to her eyes, mourning not just her parents, but the girl she might have been. But every morning she rose before dawn, braided Sarah's hair, checked Michael's homework, and walked out into the cold city with her shoulders straight. She was not their sister anymore. She was their mother, their father, their only defense against a world that seemed designed to break families like theirs apart. And she would not let them fall. The promise she made that first terrible night became the structure of her entire existence. Protect them, no matter the cost. It was a vow she believed was absolute, unbreakable, a line she would never cross. She did not yet know how desperately the world would test that certainty or what price she would eventually pay to keep it. The eviction notice was taped to their door on a Tuesday, the bold red letters visible from the stairwell. Joanna tore it down quickly, heart hammering, before Michael or Sarah could see. 72 hours. 3 days to produce 2 months' back rent plus late fees, or the locks would be changed and their belongings set on the street. She stood in the narrow hallway, the paper shaking in her hands, doing the math she already knew by heart. Her paychecks were stretched to breaking. Food, utilities, Sarah's asthma medication. There was nothing left. She had already sold everything of value, her mother's jewelry, the old television, even her own winter coat. The apartment was stripped bare, except for necessities. Sarah's cough had worsened that week, the wheezing sound that meant another hospital visit, another bill they couldn't afford. Michael was silent and withdrawn, the teenage shame of poverty settling on his shoulders like a weight. And now this. Joanna pressed her forehead against the door, fighting the wave of panic that threatened to drown her. She called every contact she had, former bosses, old school friends, distant relatives. The answers were all the same: apologies, excuses, polite refusals. No one had money to spare. The social services office offered emergency shelter in separate facilities for boys, girls, and adults over 18. The family would be split, exactly what Joanna had fought for years to prevent. That evening, a former co-worker named Tasha called back. Her voice was hesitant, careful. "I know someone who works at a place downtown, the Blackout Bar, high-end clientele. They're looking for girls for private evenings, just conversation, company. It pays really well. One night could cover your rent." Joanna knew immediately what kind of place it was. The careful euphemisms, the uncomfortable pause. Her stomach turned. "No, absolutely not. Joe, I'm just telling you it exists. I know you're in trouble." That night, Joanna sat alone in the dark apartment, listening to Sarah's labored breathing from the next room. She thought about homeless shelters, about watching Michael and Sarah taken away by strangers, about the promise she made over her parents' graves. The walls seemed to close in, the eviction notice burning in her mind. She called Tasha back at midnight. The Blackout Bar occupied the basement of an expensive hotel. The lighting was dim, the music soft, the atmosphere thick with unspoken transactions. A woman in elegant clothes explained the terms: cash payment, discretion guaranteed. One evening with a client who had already been shown Joanna's photo and approved. The woman's voice was businesslike, devoid of judgment or sympathy, as if they were discussing office work. Joanna signed papers she barely read, her hand numb. The client was middle-aged, polite, a businessman from out of town. The hotel room was impersonal and clean. Joanna felt herself fracture, her mind separating from her body, watching from a great distance as she went through motions that felt scripted and unreal. She focused on the money. 2 months' rent, Sarah's medication, groceries. It was over in less than an hour. The man dressed, thanked her politely, and left. Joanna sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope of cash on the nightstand, and felt something inside her collapse. She made it to the alley behind the hotel before the nausea hit. She vomited until there was nothing left, then sank against the brick wall, shaking violently, tears streaming down her face. The money was still clutched in her fist, crumpled and damp. She hated it, she hated herself, but she could not let it go. The next morning, Joanna paid the rent in cash, bought Sarah's medication, and filled the kitchen with food. Michael and Sarah's relief was immediate, their smiles bright. They didn't ask where the money came from. Joanna cooked dinner, helped with homework, and smiled until they were asleep. Then she locked herself in the bathroom, scrubbed her skin until it was raw, and made a second vow. Never again. She would carry this secret alone, buried so deep that not even she would have to look at it. It would be the price she paid for their survival, a single unforgivable night that bought them time. She did not know that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of clawing back to the surface. 3 years passed. Joanna was 23 now, her days measured in work shifts and bills paid. She had settled into a rhythm of survival, cleaning offices at dawn, evenings at a small diner, weekends at a laundromat. Michael was in high school, Sarah in middle school, both healthy and safe. The secret from that night remained locked away, a dark weight Joanna carried silently. The rainy evening started like any other. Joanna finished her last office building at midnight and began the long walk home, umbrella broken, her sneakers soaked through. The highway overpass was poorly lit, traffic sparse. She was thinking about the grocery list, the overdue electric bill, when the sound of screeching tires shattered the quiet. The black sedan hydroplaned across 2 lanes, spinning violently before slamming into the concrete barrier with a sickening crunch of metal. Smoke began to rise from the crumpled hood. Joanna froze, heart pounding, as other cars slowed and stopped at a cautious distance. Doors opened, people emerged with phones raised, recording, but no one moved toward the wreck. Joanna ran. Her bag fell somewhere behind her. Rain pounded her face. The sedan's driver's side door was jammed, the window cracked but intact. Inside, a man slumped unconscious against the steering wheel, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The smoke thickened. Joanna grabbed a rock from the roadside and smashed the window, ignoring the glass cutting her palms. She reached through, unlocked the door, and dragged the man's limp body onto the wet pavement. Someone finally called 911. Joanna knelt beside the stranger, pressing her jacket against his bleeding head wound, calling out for help that came too slowly. His chest rose and fell, weakly. His expensive suit was torn, his face pale. She didn't recognize him. She didn't care. She just kept pressure on the wound, whispering prayers she half remembered from childhood. The ambulance arrived in a blaze of lights. Paramedics took over, efficient and brisk, loading the man onto a stretcher. One asked Joanna if she was injured. She shook her head, suddenly aware of her cut hands, her soaked clothes, the exhaustion pulling at her limbs. The ambulance doors closed. The crowd dispersed. Joanna stood alone on the empty highway, shaking. She walked to the hospital, not knowing why. Maybe to know he survived. Maybe because adrenaline still buzzed in her veins and she couldn't go home yet. She sat in the bright, sterile waiting room for hours, invisible among the late-night visitors, and eventually fell asleep in a plastic chair. "Miss? Excuse me, miss?" Joanna woke to a nurse gently shaking her shoulder. "Are you the woman who pulled Mr. Roberts from the car?" Joanna blinked, disoriented. "Is he alive?" "He's stable. He's asking to see you." The private suite was on the hospital's top floor, far from the chaotic emergency room. The man lay in bed, bandages wrapped around his head, monitors beeping softly. His eyes were open, alert, focused on Joanna with startling intensity. "You saved my life." His voice was rough but clear. Joanna stood awkwardly near the door, suddenly aware of how she must look. Filthy, blood-stained, exhausted. Anyone would have done it. "No," he said quietly. "They wouldn't. I saw them standing there, watching." She didn't know what to say. She felt uncomfortable under his gaze, exposed in a way she couldn't name. "I'm Maxwell Roberts." He paused, as if the name should mean something. It didn't. Joanna nodded politely. "I'm glad you're okay. I should go." "Wait." He reached toward the bedside table, wincing. "Let me thank you properly. Let me pay for—" "No!" The word came out sharper than she intended. "I don't want money. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Maxwell studied her, something shifting in his expression. Surprise, curiosity, respect. "At least tell me your name." "Joanna. Joanna Myer." He repeated it slowly, as if committing it to memory. "Thank you, Joanna Myer. You gave me my life back." She left quickly, before the conversation could continue, before the weight of his gratitude became something she'd have to carry. Outside, the rain had stopped. Dawn was breaking over the city. Joanna walked home, her hands bandaged by a kind nurse. Believing the encounter was over, she was wrong. 1 week later, Joanna was scrubbing floors in a corporate office tower when her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Miss Myer, this is James, Mr. Roberts' personal driver. He'd like to speak with you." "I'm outside your building." Joanna's heart sank. She had hoped he'd forgotten, moved on. Gratitude didn't usually last this long. She rode the elevator down, apprehensive, and found a sleek black car idling at the curb, impossibly out of place in her neighborhood. James was polite and professional, opening the rear door without explanation. Joanna hesitated, then climbed in and found herself face to face with Maxwell Roberts. He looked healthier now, the bandages reduced to a small white square at his temple, his suit immaculate. "I'm sorry for the ambush," Maxwell said, smiling slightly. "You didn't leave contact information." "I didn't think it was necessary." "I want to offer you a job." Joanna blinked. "I have jobs, 2 of them. As my household manager at my penthouse in Manhattan. The pay is 4 times what you're making now, plus housing if you need it. Full benefits." He said it casually, as if offering her a cup of coffee rather than a life-changing opportunity. Joanna stared at him. "Why?" "Because you risked your life for a stranger and asked for nothing in return. That kind of character is rare. I trust you." "You don't even know me." "I know enough." The offer was absurd, too generous. It made her deeply uncomfortable. "I can't." "Why not?" "I have siblings, responsibilities." "Bring them, or I'll arrange care, whatever you need." Maxwell leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Joanna, you saved my life. Let me help improve yours, not as payment. You already refused that, but because I genuinely need someone I can trust. And I believe that's you." The refusal was on her lips. But she thought of Michael's worn shoes, Sarah's inhaler running low, the rent always looming. She thought of exhaustion so deep it felt permanent. And she thought dangerously of the possibility of something better. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. Maxwell handed her a card with a phone number. Call me when you're ready. Joanna spent 2 days in agonized indecision. She consulted Michael and Sarah, who were cautiously excited. She visited the penthouse address online, staring at images of unimaginable luxury. She researched Maxwell Roberts and felt her stomach drop. Billionaire, tech mogul, one of the wealthiest men in the country. What was he doing offering her a job? But the money, the security, the chance to stop drowning. She called. Arrangements were made quickly. Mrs. Chen, their kind neighbor, would check on Michael and Sarah during the week. Joanna would return to Brooklyn on weekends. It was temporary, Joanna told herself, just until she saved enough for a real safety net. On a bright Sunday morning, James arrived with the car. Joanna packed a single bag, she didn't own much, and hugged her siblings tightly. I'll call every day. If anything feels wrong, I'll come home immediately. The drive across the bridge into Manhattan felt like crossing into another world. The buildings grew taller, shinier, the streets cleaner. The car pulled into an underground garage beneath a gleaming high-rise. Joanna followed Maxwell into an elevator that required a key card, and they rose silently to the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into his home. Joanna stepped out and forgot to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. The furniture was sleek and minimalist, the art on the walls worth more than her entire neighborhood. Everything gleamed. "Welcome," Maxwell said, smiling at her awestruck expression. "Let me show you around." Joanna barely heard him. She felt profoundly out of place, a smudge on a pristine canvas. This wasn't her world. It never would be. But she had crossed the bridge, and there was no simple way back. Mrs. Grace, the head housekeeper, was a stern woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, and eyes that missed nothing. She met Joanna in the service hallway with a clipboard and a look of clear skepticism. "Mr. Roberts has unconventional hiring practices," Mrs. Grace said crisply, "but standards in this household remain high. You'll address him as Mr. Roberts. Maintain professional boundaries at all times and complete your tasks efficiently and invisibly. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." The orientation was rigorous. Joanna learned the schedule. Maxwell's preferred breakfast at 7, specific coffee blend, temperature settings for every room, the names and temperaments of his business associates. The penthouse had 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a library, a private gym, and a kitchen bigger than Joanna's entire apartment. Mrs. Grace explained each room's maintenance routine with exacting detail. Joanna absorbed it all, taking notes, her imposter syndrome growing with every instruction. She had cleaned buildings before, but this was different. This was personal, intimate. Every object she touched cost more than she made in a month. Her quarters were a small suite near the kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, and a window overlooking the city. It was the nicest place Joanna had ever slept. That first night, she lay in the impossibly soft bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt like a trespasser. The work itself was manageable. Joanna was diligent and meticulous, learned quickly, and stayed invisible as instructed. She woke before Maxwell, prepared his breakfast, cleaned quietly while he worked in his office. He was polite but distant, preoccupied with business calls and meetings. Sometimes entire days passed with barely a word exchanged. But slowly something shifted. Maxwell began appearing in the kitchen while Joanna worked, leaning against the counter with coffee, asking casual questions. Where was she from? Did she like the city? How were her siblings? At first, Joanna answered cautiously, maintaining professional distance. But Maxwell's curiosity felt genuine, not intrusive. He shared stories, too, his childhood, his parents' difficult divorce, the loneliness of wealth. Joanna found herself laughing at his self-deprecating jokes, relaxing slightly. Mrs. Grace noticed and disapproved. "Familiarity breeds complications," she warned. "Remember your place." Joanna tried, but Maxwell seemed determined to erase the boundaries. He insisted she call him Maxwell instead of Mr. Roberts. He asked her opinions on decisions, listened thoughtfully. He found her reading during a break and started leaving books he thought she'd enjoy on her nightstand. It was strange and disorienting. Joanna had been invisible for so long, to employers, to strangers, to the city itself. Being seen felt dangerous. She didn't belong here. She carried secrets that would shatter this fragile, improbable kindness if they ever surfaced. 3 weeks into the job, Joanna was organizing the library when she heard the elevator chime. Maxwell was out. She glanced toward the foyer and froze. A woman emerged, tall and elegant in a designer coat, her hair perfectly styled, diamonds glinting at her throat. She surveyed the penthouse with the critical eye of someone evaluating property. Then her gaze landed on Joanna. "You must be the new help," the woman said, her tone cool and assessing. "Where is my son?" Joanna's stomach dropped. "Mrs. Roberts. Mr. Roberts is at a meeting. He'll return this evening." Cassandra Roberts smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How convenient. That gives us time to get acquainted." She removed her coat, draping it over Joanna's arm without asking, and walked deeper into the penthouse as if she owned it. Joanna stood holding the coat, her heart pounding, watching the sleek black limousine visible through the windows below. The storm had arrived. Cassandra Roberts moved through the penthouse like a queen inspecting her kingdom, touching furniture, adjusting picture frames, her expression one of perpetual elegant disapproval. Joanna followed uncertainly, still holding the coat. "You're younger than I expected," Cassandra said without turning around. "Where did Maxwell find you?" "He offered me a position after an accident. I helped him." "Ah, yes, the rescue." Cassandra's tone made it sound vaguely distasteful. "My son has always been sentimental. It's a weakness in business." She finally looked at Joanna directly, her gaze sharp and measuring. "What's your background?" "I've worked in cleaning services, hospitality, education. I didn't finish high school." The silence that followed was pointed. Cassandra's smile was thin. "I see. Well, I'm sure you're adequate for basic tasks, though I'll be visiting more frequently to ensure standards are maintained." It wasn't a threat, exactly, but the message was clear. "You don't belong here, and I'm watching." Maxwell returned that evening to find his mother seated in the living room, sipping wine. His expression immediately tightened. "Mother, I didn't know you were coming." "A mother doesn't need an appointment, darling." Cassandra set down her glass. "I wanted to meet your new employee." The emphasis on the word made Joanna, standing quietly near the kitchen, feel like an insect under glass. Over the following weeks, Cassandra became a constant oppressive presence. She arrived unannounced, issued contradictory instructions, and criticized Joanna's work with surgical precision. The floors weren't polished correctly. The flowers were arranged tastelessly. Joanna's uniform was inappropriate. Each critique was delivered with a smile, making refusal or defense impossible. Joanna absorbed it silently. She needed this job. She couldn't afford pride. But Cassandra's campaign escalated. She assigned Joanna degrading tasks, scrubbing the same bathroom 3 times, reorganizing the entire pantry by brand, hand-washing delicate items that required hours of painstaking care. She made veiled comments about Joanna's background and limited prospects within Maxwell's earshot, watching for reactions. Maxwell noticed. He grew increasingly protective, intervening when his mother's demands became absurd. "Mother, Mrs. Grace handles the household schedule. Joanna reports to me, not you." "I'm simply ensuring quality, Maxwell. You can't be too careful about who you allow into your home." The tension simmered, barely contained. One evening, after Cassandra had finally left and the penthouse was quiet, Maxwell found Joanna in the library, exhausted and close to tears. She'd tried to compose herself quickly, but he'd already seen. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, sitting across from her. "My mother is complicated. She's right, though. I don't belong here." "That's not true." Maxwell's voice was firm. "You belong here because I trust you, because you're kind and honest and work harder than anyone I know." My mother's opinion doesn't change that. They talked late into the night about difficult parents, the weight of expectations, the loneliness of pretending to be someone you're not. Maxwell shared stories about his father's coldness, his mother's obsession with status. Joanna found herself opening up slightly, carefully, about raising her siblings, the constant fear of failure. For the first time in years, she felt understood. Their conversations became routine. After long days, they'd sit in the library or on the balcony, talking about everything and nothing. Maxwell made her laugh. Joanna challenged his assumptions about the world. The boundaries between employer and employee blurred into something warmer, more dangerous. Joanna tried to pull back. This was temporary. She was staff. They lived in different universes. But when Maxwell looked at her, she felt seen in a way that terrified and thrilled her, and she began to realize, with growing dread, that she was falling in love with a man whose world would never accept her, and whose mother would destroy her if given the chance. It happened on a Thursday evening, the city lights glittering below like scattered diamonds. Joanna was preparing dinner when Maxwell appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen. "Can we talk?" They sat in the library. Maxwell's hands were restless, unusual for someone normally so composed. "Joanna, I know this is inappropriate. I'm your employer. There's a power imbalance, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this." Joanna's heart hammered. "Maxwell, I'm in love with you." The words were simple, direct. "I have been for weeks." The confession hung in the air. Joanna felt everything inside her crack open. Longing, fear, shame. "You can't be." "Why not?" "Because I clean your floors, because your mother despises me, because we're from completely different worlds, and this is—" "None of that matters. It matters to everyone else." Joanna stood, agitated. "Maxwell, you're a billionaire. I'm nobody. Your family, your friends, the media, they'll tear this apart. They'll tear me apart." "Let them. I don't care." "You should." Her voice broke. "You don't know everything about me. There are things—" "Then tell me." She couldn't. The secret from 3 years ago felt like poison, something that would destroy this fragile, impossible thing between them. "I can't." Maxwell stood crossing the distance between them, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Whatever it is, it doesn't change how I feel." He kissed her. Joanna melted into it, every wall she'd built crumbling. For one perfect, terrifying moment she let herself believe this could be real. Then reality crashed back. She pulled away, tears streaming. This is a mistake. But it was too late. They both knew it. Cassandra noticed immediately the way Maxwell looked at Joanna, the protective edge in his voice, the time they spent alone. She confronted him that weekend, her fury cold and controlled. "That girl. Maxwell, have you lost your mind?" "Her name is Joanna, and yes, I care about her." "She's a maid, a nobody. You'll embarrass yourself, embarrass this family." "I don't care about appearances." "Then you're a fool." Cassandra's eyes glittered with calculation. "She's using you." "People like her always do." "You don't know her." "And you think you do?" The argument ended in stalemate, but Cassandra's expression promised retribution. Within days, a private investigator was hired. It took him less than a week to find the blackout bar connection. One night, 3 years ago, a transaction recorded in the establishment's discreet but not impenetrable files, a blurry photo, Joanna's name and signature. Cassandra held the manila folder like a weapon. She called her contact at Prestige Insider, one of Manhattan's most ruthless gossip blogs, and leaked the story anonymously. The headline went live on a Tuesday morning, "Billionaire's Maid from Escort to Penthouse." Joanna was folding laundry when her phone exploded with notifications. Confused, she opened the article and felt the floor drop away. Her name, her photo. The words sex work and Maxwell Roberts and calculated seduction jumping out like knives. The secret she'd buried, the shame she'd carried alone, was now public, dissected, judged by millions. She couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from her hands. Outside, camera flashes erupted, paparazzi already swarming the building. Maxwell found her, collapsed on the floor of her room, shaking violently. He'd seen the article. He pulled her into his arms, but she pushed him away, drowning in humiliation. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You have to fire me. You have to—" "I'm not firing you. They're going to destroy you because of me." "I don't care." Maxwell's voice was fierce. "Joanna, look at me. This doesn't change anything." But it changed everything. The woman he'd fallen in love with was also the desperate girl who'd sold herself to save her siblings. And now the whole world was watching to see if a billionaire's love could survive the weight of her past. The penthouse became a fortress under siege. Paparazzi camped outside. News vans lined the street. Joanna's phone rang constantly with reporters demanding comment. Every major gossip outlet ran the story, each version more sensationalized than the last. Inside, the confrontation was inevitable. Cassandra arrived with triumph barely concealed in her expression, while Maxwell's face was carved from stone. "This is who you're defending?" Cassandra gestured toward Joanna, who stood silent and small near the windows. "A prostitute? Maxwell, this will destroy your reputation, your business relationships." "Everything we've built." "You did this." Maxwell's voice was lethal quiet. "You hired the investigator. You leaked the story." Cassandra didn't deny it. "I protected you from making a catastrophic mistake." "You violated someone's privacy and weaponized their worst moment because you couldn't stand the idea of me choosing someone you didn't approve." "I won't apologize for having standards." "Your standards are cruelty dressed as class." Maxwell stepped closer to his mother, his control fracturing. Joanna was 15 when her parents died. She raised 2 children alone, worked herself half to death, and made one desperate choice to keep them from being separated. That's not a scandal. That's survival. And you turned it into a weapon because you care more about appearances than human beings. Cassandra's composure finally cracked. "She's beneath you." "No, Mother, you are." The words landed like a slap. Cassandra went pale. then turned and left without another word, her heels echoing sharply in the silence. Maxwell turned to Joanna, who was crying silently, arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry. I should have protected you from her." "How could you?" Joanna's voice was broken. "She's right. I am beneath you. I'm exactly what they're saying." "Stop." Maxwell crossed to her, tilting her face up gently. "You are the bravest, most selfless person I've ever met. What you did doesn't define you. What defines you is raising 2 kids alone, saving a stranger's life, working 3 jobs without complaint. That's who you are." "But they'll never see that. They'll only see the scandal, and you'll lose everything." "Then I'll lose it." Joanna stared at him.
"What? If the cost of keeping you is my fortune, my status, my family's approval, I'll pay it." Maxwell's hands framed her face. "I love you. Not the empire, not the legacy. You. Maxwell, you can't. Watch me." The next morning, Maxwell called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he stepped to the microphone, composed and resolute. "I'm here to address the recent stories about Joanna Myer. What the media has done is cruel and reductive. They've taken a young woman's moment of desperate survival and used it to entertain and judge. Joanna is not defined by one night 3 years ago. She's defined by her courage, integrity, and sacrificial love for her family. I'm also here to announce that I'm stepping away from Roberts Industries and my family's financial holdings. I'll be donating my inheritance to organizations supporting at-risk youth and economic justice. My mother's values are not my values. Her priorities are not mine. Joanna Myer saved my life, and now I'm choosing to build a new one, with her, away from this circus, based on truth rather than image. Thank you." The room erupted. Maxwell walked off stage, ignoring the shouted questions, and found Joanna waiting backstage, tears streaming down her face. "You just gave up everything." "No," Maxwell said, pulling her close. "I just chose the only thing that matters." That night they packed 2 bags, left the penthouse keys with Mrs. Grace, and drove north out of the city. The skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror as dawn broke over quiet hills and farmland. They arrived in a small upstate town by midday, rented a modest house on a tree-lined street, and sat on the porch steps holding hands. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was the beginning of something real, built not on wealth or status, but on the choice to love someone wholly, past and all, and the courage to walk away from a world that couldn't understand that kind of grace. The months that followed were quiet in a way Joanna had never known. There were no camera flashes, no gossip articles, no opulent surroundings, just a small house with creaking floors, morning coffee on the porch, and the slow, steady work of healing. Maxwell opened a modest tech consulting business, working with small companies and nonprofits. Joanna took a position at a children's literacy charity, teaching reading to kids who reminded her, painfully and beautifully, of Michael and Sarah. Her siblings visited on weekends, filling the house with laughter and teasing and the familiar comfort of family. The town accepted them without fuss. People recognized Maxwell occasionally, but respected their privacy. Joanna learned to grocery shop without fear, to walk down Main Street without hunching her shoulders, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this ordinary, precious peace. They planted a garden. Maxwell learned to cook badly. Joanna laughed more than she had in her entire life. They talked late into the night about their childhoods, their fears, the future they wanted to build. Slowly, the shame that had defined Joanna for years began to loosen its grip. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after they'd left Manhattan, a sleek black car appeared on their street. Joanna's heart stopped. She knew that car.
Cassandra Roberts emerged slowly, hesitantly, looking smaller somehow without her usual entourage. Maxwell stepped onto the porch, his body tense, but Joanna touched his arm gently. "It's okay." Cassandra stood at the gate, her elegant composure cracked by something raw and unfamiliar. Regret. "May I speak with you both?" They sat in the modest living room. Cassandra's hands twisted in her lap, a gesture of nervousness Joanna never thought she'd see. "I've spent this year alone," Cassandra said quietly. "My son won't return my calls. My social circle has moved on, and I've had time to think about why." She looked at Joanna directly, her eyes damp. "I was cruel to you. I judged you for circumstances you couldn't control, and I weaponized your pain because I cared more about status than people. I was wrong." Joanna sat very still, waiting. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it. You are not beneath my son. You never were. And he's happier now than I've ever seen him." Cassandra's voice broke. "I just wanted to be part of his life again, if he'll let me." Maxwell looked at Joanna. The decision, somehow, was hers to make. Joanna thought about the night at the Blackout Bar, about shame and secrets and the crushing weight of judgment, about grace she didn't deserve but had been given anyway. She thought about the girl she'd been and the woman she was becoming and the long, painful journey between the two. "You hurt me," Joanna said softly. "Badly. But I understand what it's like to carry regret, and I believe people can change, if they choose to." She stood, crossed the room, and extended her hand. "I forgive you, Mrs. Roberts." Cassandra took her hand, then pulled Joanna into an unexpected embrace, crying quietly. Maxwell joined them, and for a long moment the three of them stood together in the small living room, broken pieces beginning to fit back together. The wedding was small. Joanna wore a simple white dress. Maxwell wore jeans and a button-down. Michael walked Joanna down the aisle. Sarah was her maid of honor. Cassandra sat in the front row, crying openly. The local children from the literacy program threw wildflowers. The ceremony was held in the backyard under an oak tree, officiated by the town pastor and attended by neighbors who'd become family. Joanna and Maxwell exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about forgiveness, second chances, and choosing love even when the world made it hard. Years later, with their two young children asleep upstairs and the house finally quiet, Joanna and Maxwell sat on the porch in the fading light. Cassandra visited regularly now, a grandmother transformed by humility. Michael was in college. Sarah was thriving. The scandal had faded into internet obscurity. "Do you ever regret it?" Joanna asked. "Giving up everything?" Maxwell pulled her close. "I gave up money and status. I gained a life worth living. That's not a sacrifice. That's a trade I'd make 1,000 times over." Joanna rested her head on his shoulder, watching fireflies drift across the yard. She thought about the scared, desperate girl who'd once believed she was irredeemable, and the woman she'd become. Loved, forgiven, whole. The past didn't disappear, but it no longer had the power to define her future. And that, she thought, was its own kind of miracle.